Konnichiwa.
Howdy, y'all.
I'm Leslie.
And I am Laurie.
And welcome to Sumo Kaboom, where we talk about all things sumo.
Yep. And we're getting into scandals, y'all.
Scandals.
Scandalous sumo stories. This is something we have thought about doing for a while now. But, well, a couple things held us back, I think. One, we wanted to be really nice. At least I did. I was like, I don't want to cover the dark, seedy side.
I don't want to know about
sumo.
the bad, dark stuff.
That was one thing that held us back for a long time. And the other thing that held me back was the sheer vast amount of writing and information on the web about sumo scandals. But we have decided to jump in and take it on bit and pieces at a time. So today we're going to talk about the betting or the gambling scandal and the Yakuza. All right. But before we jump into that dark piece of sumo history,
it's time for a news flash. I'll start out this news flash by saying that I, again, am out of town, so I'm not in my normal space, which means I have my pug with me, and you will hear her snoring in the background. So that's just an added bonus, just a little newsflash added bonus.
And it's not that your pug isn't interested.
No, well, she could care less. She's not impressed by sumo. I figure I'd tell you about some of the other things happening in the sumo world.
Great.
So did you know that Hakuho, Miyagano Oyakata, is going to be making a trip to North America?
I heard to Canada, yes?
Well, that's North America.
Yes, but not the United States.
No.
I mean, I wanted to get really excited about it, except that it's not to the U.S.
Yeah, he's going to Ontario, Canada, which is...
And there's nothing wrong with Canada, y'all. Nothing wrong at all.
No, it's like 100,000 people meeting like last year. That's how many people were there for it's an enormous Japanese festival. So they're bringing over the GOAT to do a little bit of interview. But I was just like, oh, if I just was in Canada.
And if we have some listeners up there, they best be sending us some photos.
I hope. So all of our Canadian friends, it looks like things are looking up for you.
Yep.
Also, another piece of information I thought was really kind of interesting, and it does go along with the kind of scandal thing. There was a wrestler from Sadakotake stable last year or the year before, if you remember, he quit amidst the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, because as he says it, the culture of sumo pretty much said at the time, you either wrestle and risk dying or you retire. And he held a press conference this week explaining that he's actually filing charges against Sadakotake Oyakata and the JSA seeking damages. He also states that the culture of sumo is sort of like a slave culture, and it is not acceptable to those to people that the culture supports these kind of brutal practices just because it's in the name of tradition. So I think that's going to be a really interesting thing that's going to come out in time. I mean, it could be completely squashed, but we've got one former wrestler who is just not happy at the pandemic response within the JSA. So that's, and he's filing charges. So it's serious enough. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
But if you are not on Facebook or Twitter or the world of sumo news, you have been missing out on all of the summer tour or the fall tour Jungyo photos. Asanoyama is off of the summer tour. Ken Bozan also left the fall tour with a sprained cervical spine issue. Taka Keisho is back on the tour, claiming that his knee is much better miraculously. It wasn't taped up and he was sparring with Kirishima. And Takayasu is out of the tour due to a sprained back. So it seems like these tours, they bump in and out. I think they like going on them because they get to be like super famous, and enjoy all the spoils of the small town. But they also seem like they peace out when they're like sort of injured, But that's pretty much it. All is well and as usual on the tour, and everyone is loving the happy crowds. We're getting lots of good photos on social media of Kirishima like pumping iron and all kinds of fun stuff that of course we absolutely love in the world of sumo news. But that is all I've got.
Okay, scandals.
Scandals.
Here we go.
Scandals.
If you have ever wondered why the Japan Sumo Association seems so severe today, why they're so interested in making sure that their young men represent the best in all of us, it is because only 10 or 15 years ago, the sumo world experienced several scandals in quick succession and put the sumo world in kind of a tailspin. From 2007 to 2012, in the sumo world, there were 4 big sumo scandals that pretty much overlapped, and I did not realize this until I started looking into the scandals.
They all happened at the same time?
In the same kind of 5 years, yeah. There was a deadly hazing incident of a young wrestler.
That was tragic.
Yeah, and we did a short on that incident and gave it to our donors on Ko-Fi, but we might also share that story here in the next month as well. There was a drunken brawl at a pub. There were reports of drug use. There was betting.
What kind of drugs? Like pot or like hard drugs?
We'll talk about all of these in the next few weeks. But there was also betting. There was match fixing within the sumo stable. It was just a really, really dark time.
But the thing is, match fixing has been going on since, for 2,000 years.
Well,
it's kind of the way. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but it does make me kind of laugh at that one because it is serious, but that's kind of the way they dealt with injuries in the past.
Well, we are going to tackle these sumo scandals one at a time to allow us to really unpack them and to help you as listeners understand why sumo lost so many fans 10 years ago even, and how the JSA continues to change or to try to change to meet these challenges, as well as, just highlighting the importance of media for ensuring that these things come to light and that they do not continue. So these might be dark stories to listen to for the next few weeks, but I do think it's important that we understand them. So first, we're going to be taking on illegal gambling and the Yakuza.
I do like a sinister gangster story.
Yeah. Whenever I say Yakuza in the story, just imagine Tony Soprano. That would be a great entry. Or Al Capone, if you've got an image of Al Capone in your head.
Yeah, the Japanese version of Al Capone.
Yes. And you should know I am an absolute expert on the Yakuza. I know everything there is to know about it because it's all on the web right there for me to read about. So
if anybody doesn't know what the Yakuza is, it's the equivalent of it's gang. It's a gang.
Yeah, it's a gang.
It's like
organized crime in Japan.
The Japanese mob.
Stories about the ties between the sumo world and the world of organized crime in Japan are nothing new. And in 1996, in fact, there are interesting story, kind of a side note, but a former sumo wrestler and a stable master and I think it was one of his stable supporters came forward with allegations of match rigging and drug use and sexcapades and tax evasion and close ties to the Yakuza. They were going to talk to the media about all of this stuff, but oddly, both of them were found dead in the same hospital hours apart.
Wow.
On the same day in April in 1996. And there was absolutely no proof of poisoning. There was no proof that anything went wrong. But it's a wee bit odd, isn't it?
What?
Yes.
It was a former wrestler?
Yeah, a former sumo wrestler and a supporter of a sumo stable.
Oh,
So
so they were
strange.
poisoned.
Well, we don't know. There's no proof of it. We do not know.
I'm gonna say they were poisoned.
Leslie's going to guess, but because we were talking about the mob, I'm just going to say there was no evidence, and it's a wee bit odd.
And if you are in the Yakuza and you're listening, we're not saying that you did anything bad.
That's right. But that happened in 1996. And then, strangely, no one said anything else about the Yakuza for a while.
Well, I guess they got the message.
Yes.
You don't squeal.
You don't talk. Yeah.
You don't talk.
And so then things started to shift a little bit, and to understand how this happened, I'm going to start this phase of this story in late 2009, early 2010, when Ozeki Koto Mitsuki was riding high. So this guy's an Ozeki. He's like a Takakeisho. He's like a Kirishima, a Kirishima. He's like a Shodai. He's an Ozeki.
Okay.
And he is one of sumo's oldest Ozekis. He was in his 30s. He was very, very popular and was doing really well at the rank of Ozeki. He had already won 2 outstanding performance prizes, 4 fighting spirit prizes, 7 technique prizes. He had beaten Asashoryu. He had already won a Yusho earlier in his career. Yes, he had a few injuries. He had some gallstones, but his future in sumo looked bright.
I mean, but was he really that good?
He was. He was making big money.
These were real bouts that were really like you could really watch and be like, he really tried hard. He didn't throw all those.
Yes. Okay. Now, I'm not talking at all today about throwing matches.
Right.
I'm going to try to keep that separate, even though in your mind, know that all of these scandals pretty much overlapped. Okay. I'm only talking about gambling and the Yakuza today.
Okay.
So this guy was making money, hand over fist, doing really well as a Ozeki, and he had enough money to burn, right? Enough money to be like, what do I do with all this money? And so he started to think, maybe I'll bet on some sports.
He could have just invested it.
He could have opened an IRA. It would have been he should have talked to a tax person, perhaps. What do I do with all this money? But he thought, you know what? I am going to bet on baseball. And this is illegal in Japan. You can do it, but it is illegal. And the way you do it in Japan is you find yourself a little person connected to the mob. You do it to the Yakuza. You use a Japanese organized crime ring to do it. That's how you do it in Japan. And so that's where the Yakuza start to kind of sneak into this story. So anyway, this Ozeki, Koto Mitsuki, he placed a big bet on a baseball team and he won big, right? Oh. He's winning in the ring. He won big on the baseball field. He won 5 million yen.
Whoa.
And he was like, woohoo, I am going to collect my winnings.
Oh.
Okay, so there's no window you can go up to anonymously as a sumo wrestler and say, hello, crime ring. I am here for my winnings.
Excuse me, Mr. Yakuza, I am due
I got the
5
winning
million
ticket.
Yen.
I got the golden ticket.
I have a feeling that this wasn't quite a fair bargain. This wasn't a fair bet.
Yeah. So the way you get your winnings is you use your go-betweens. So in this case, he had a couple of go-betweens, and I find these fascinating. One of his go-betweens was his hairdresser.
Oh,
yes.
Evil not Yobidashi, Tokoyama.
Yes. A hairdresser gone rogue. These hairdressers can be involved in shady
there's
stuff.
Like a hairdresser with like a leather jacket on and like greased up hair.
Absolutely.
And he's a bad guy.
Absolutely. But he makes a mean ginkgo leaf. I'm telling you. So he was a go-between, as well as a lower division sumo wrestler whose brother
Of
had
course.
also been a former Rikishi, but was a self-described gang member. Okay.
Whoa.
So a lower division sumo wrestler whose brother was like somehow involved in the Yakuza. And this guy's name was Mitsutomo Furuichi. But because that name is tough, I just call him Mr. Fury. Okay.
What is it again? Mr. Mitsufushi
right.
Furahiri?
Mitsutomo Furuichi. Or Mr. Fury.
I like Mr. Fury.
I like too, because it's kind of like Nick Fury. So when this Ozeki, went through all of the go-betweens, he like talks to his hairdresser, and the hairdresser, while he's doing the hair on the younger wrestler, says,
is
you
this
need
all
to talk
happening
to your
in a
brother.
dark alley, I hope?
Right. So this is taking place in stables. Okay.
What?
So he talks to the younger sumo wrestler. The sumo wrestler then talks to his brother, Mr. Fury. So Mr. Fury gets the call or the sign to pay up. And he says, back through this chain of command and back to the hairdresser, Mr. Fury says, I am not paying you.
What?
If the media and the police find out, Mr. Ozeki, you will be ruined. In fact, I will expose you and your gambling unless you pay me
extortion.
$3.5 million in hush money.
Extortion.
That's right. So this reportedly was a pretty common practice whenever a sumo wrestler won big. If they won small, it was not a big deal. But if they won big, this is when these hush money payments would start to come into play.
I mean, was it just that that guy was even more at risk? I mean, I guess this is like inner workings of the Yakuza, or he just was a bad dude that he's like, well, he needs his money. I'm just going to take advantage of the situation. I would think a nice Yakuza member would be like, I'm going to take a small cut. But
there is a question. Are there nice Yakuza members?
If you are listening and you are a Yakuza member, go ahead and call anonymously to our phone number and let us know.
I think if you were an honest Yakuza member, you might just take your percentage, but that's probably not what makes you a Yakuza member. Probably not. So there's probably a whole lot of like sets of rules that I don't know anything about that are like, okay, if a person makes X amount, then you charge them and you extort them for, who knows how it works. But that's what this guy did. He was like, I'm not paying you $5 million. You're paying me $3.5 million, or I'm going to the media and the police.
Wow.
The moral of the story is just don't do business with the Yakuza. Just don't. So poor Ozeki Kotomitsuki, what could he do? He had to pay the hush money. So he gave $3.5 million to the hairdresser.
And that guy's like all of a sudden driving like a Mercedes, like right. Nobody was tipped off. They're like, what gives?
He's got this fat wad of cash and he goes out to the front of the stable and he hands it to Mr. Fury in front of the stable.
What? What a dum-dum.
So then, a little bit later, same year, 2 more Yakuza members demand 100 million, which is...
What?
100 million yen, which is about $1 million, from the Ozeki, same Ozeki, saying, you know what? We're going to expose the names, and not only names, but photographs of every sumo wrestler and every elder who's been gambling with us for the last 4 or 5 years, if you do not give us $1 million. I
wonder if they played him from the start.
Who knows? Who knows?
They like started to like, because I do kind of know they all did get exposed, right? So,
well, yes, I'm getting there.
Makes me wonder. Was this the plan from the beginning? They were like, find me the dumbest guy in Sanyaku and find the guy who's going to fall for it, and we're going to play into him.
This time, the Ozeki didn't do it.
Oh.
And in the midst of this back and forth between these 2 Yakuza members and this Ozeki saying, no, I'm not going to give you $1 million. Absolutely not. And in the midst of all this, a weekly magazine caught wind of what was happening and released an article about this Ozeki's illegal gambling problem.
Who
There had been
snitched?
someone around him started talking, and there was enough evidence that this weekly magazine could at least publish a story about it. And initially,
it made people frightened.
Maybe. But initially the Ozeki, when it came out, he was like, absolutely, no, I didn't do any of this. He denied the allegations, completely denied them. Now, the JSA hoped to deal with this issue internally, and the media covered the story so much that the Ministry of Education got involved. And that's who sponsors the Sumo Association, is the Ministry of Education. And so once the Ministry of Education got involved, they demanded an investigation. They were like, what is happening? We need to understand what the heck is going on here. So what did they do? Well, the police started looking at bank accounts from previous sumo wrestlers that were kind of awash in these transactions using huge amounts of money, like thousands and thousands of dollars at a time. So the police started looking into that.
There's like some Sundame guy who's like constantly like putting in like 20 grand into his bank account. And you're like, dude, you don't make any money. You're somebody's Tsukibito. That makes no sense.
Yes, exactly. So they started watching that. And then the police raided and started searching sumo stables to look for evidence. So they were going through lockers and bedrooms, and they were confiscating cell phones and looking at their call history and their email history. And they were analyzing all of this stuff as long as they could get the cell phones before the boys deleted their cell phone history or got rid of their cell phone. Like there was some of that going on. And when they got a hold of these cell phones, that led to more awful discoveries. More about that next week. But the investigators were really trying to get a handle of how often this betting was happening and how much money was involved. And, you know, how did the betting and the payouts go, like who was involved? How was it working? They were really trying to understand who was a part of it. And then the other thing that the JSA did that I find hilarious is they conducted a survey.
Oh, like a monkey survey? Like
I'm absolutely sure that it read, question 1.
Survey monkey?
Do you gamble? Rarely, sometimes, occasionally.
How many times a week?
Yeah. So whenever they did this survey, it turned out through all of this, evidence that was collected, it turned out there were a heck of a lot of people that had been betting.
Wait, they actually did the survey honestly?
Well, or enough of them did it honestly enough, or enough of them saw what was happening around them, and they were like, I can't hide the evidence, so I best be answering this survey honestly. However they got the evidence, it turns out in this investigation, the JSA discovered that over 60 people
out of the 900?
Out of like
thousands?
700 people involved in the JSA, like that, including all levels and the stable masters and everything. Wow. So like 65. So, it's like 10% of everyone involved.
I mean, there were more that probably didn't answer it, honestly.
Maybe.
But still, we're working at 10% of people.
So 29 sumo wrestlers and stable masters confessed to illegal gambling. And that's, using the hairdresser with the ties to the Yakuza and, connecting them with lower ranked wrestlers, serving as middlemen. But there were also 36 additional people who were also betting on not just baseball, but like card games, like lower level things, card games, mahjong, things like that. Even Hakuho admitted to that one. So there was a lot of people that said, yeah, I've been doing some gambling. Sure. So what happened? What was the punishment for these guys? Well, 13 wrestlers from Juryo and Makuuchi were suspended for one tournament. This was July of 2010 for betting in baseball. Imagine 13 wrestlers just gone from the Banzuke in those higher levels. That is what allowed a whole lot of new men to pop up into Juryo, that tournament. So that's what happened to Chiyonokuni. Remember how we were talking last week about how Chiyonokuni popped up to Juryo and really benefited from all of this betting scandal? This was the tournament where it happened, July 2010. The other thing that happened is the Ozeki that started all of this off eventually came clean when all the other sumo wrestlers admitted they were also involved in illegal baseball gambling.
Yeah.
He said, yeah, okay, I was involved in this gambling thing.
Oh.
And he was banned for life.
So he was just like, I'm an Ozeki and now I'm gone?
They banned him forever for gambling, but really for lying about it in his testimony to the JSA. Does that sound familiar?
That does. That's really interesting, though. I mean, he's the guy that took the fall for it, though. There's so many others who I'm sure got by. Who were some of the 13 wrestlers again?
Goeido and Okinoumi were included.
Oh.
I know.
The Man of the Sea and...
Yeah.
Wow. And Goeido. Wow.
Yeah. So this Ozeki, Koto Mitsuki, was the first Ozeki to be kicked out of sumo, but he was allowed to keep his retirement money. So they didn't give him the worst punishment they could have, but they said you can't compete anymore. And how do you think he felt about it? What do you think?
I imagine he was pretty mad about it.
Yep.
So I imagine, was there retribution? Was he like, oh, okay, you want to play like that? I'll expose even more of you.
No, he didn't go that far, but you're right in that he did not think it was fair. He thought that some other wrestlers just got slaps on the wrist or just had to sit out one tournament, but he did not think it was fair that then he couldn't do sumo at all.
Goeido Ozeki at that point?
No, I don't think so. No, he was not. No, he chose to sue the JSA in 2011 for wrongful dismissal, hoping that he would be reinstated into sumo. But it wasn't just the wrestlers that were punished. The stable masters were also kicked out of sumo. That guy, the Ozeki stable master, was kicked out of sumo without his retirement money. So he got some of the most strict punishment because he was not only involved in gambling himself, but he knew that his hairdresser and that his wrestlers had links to organized crime. He knew some sort of bookkeeper that had links to organized crime. He placed bets on baseball games. Yeah. Supposedly he had been gambling in the sport for some time and bet tens and millions of yen. In fact, by the time all of this came down, it was reported that he owed about 25 million in gambling debts himself.
Whoa.
So he was in major debt with major connections to the Yakuza. So he was just kicked out.
Oh, wow.
Completely kicked out. And there was another stable master that was demoted because they had very clear evidence that he had been betting on baseball and allowed his wrestlers to bet on it. The chairman of the JSA resigned, as well as 3 other stable masters were disciplined because wrestlers in their stables were involved. So
here's my question.
Yeah.
Why baseball?
Yeah. So it's legal. You can bet on horses. You can bet on cycling. And there's one other random sport you can bet on in
like synchronized swimming or something.
Right. Yeah. Something like that. I can't remember. But you can't bet on baseball. And I started thinking, is that the same in the United States? What can and can't you bet on in Vegas? Or is it state by state? Like, I don't even know.
State by state. I mean, Vegas, you could bet on.
Can you bet on the Olympics? Nobody bets on the Olympics, right?
I think you can pretty much bet on anything, illegally or legally, in certain states.
I don't know. I really do not know in the U.S. Yeah, I was kind of fascinated by that too. But for whatever reason, you cannot bet on baseball in Japan unless you want to get involved with the Yakuza. So
thank you.
Yeah, I know. So what happened to the Yakuza guys? As far as we know, Mr. Fury was arrested for extortion for this crime. He pled guilty in court, interestingly. Long story short, he was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison for extortion. But to understand the impact of the scandal, you really do have to understand that there were 3 other scandals happening at the same time that I haven't talked to you about yet. This was one of a lot of scandals happening at once, but it exposed sumo's deep connections to organized crime. And that is really what disturbed a lot of people. It turned out that stable masters had all sorts of connections to the Yakuza. This was just the beginning. They were providing tournament tickets to gangsters. They were renting real estate from gangster-related real estate agencies. Gangsters were coming to
There's
practice.
gangster agencies?
Yes, gangster
like you can buy
real
a house
estate.
from a gangster?
Yes, you can.
Like I am a gangster-specific realtor?
Well, yes. So it's a realtor who gets
It's real shady.
It's real shady.
Like, it's a good
yeah.
deal?
Like
Deal?
I found these stories of like these Yakuza people that would try to get their tenants to leave by playing like Buddhist meditation tapes at really loud volume 24/7 to get their tenants to move out, you know?
Which is really Japanese, because like a real gangster would just show up and threaten someone's life with a gun. The Japanese gangster is like, I'll just play loud Buddhist
Meditation.
music.
I know. But these high-level gangsters were like showing up to sumo practice and coming to eat chanka with the wrestlers. They were socializing with them. Haramafuji was playing golf with a senior gangster. Yokozuna Takanohana was eating meals with another one. They were showing up everywhere. They were getting ringside seats that were usually set aside for the biggest financial donors to sumo. And they were strangely going to huge groups of men involved in organized crime. As a matter of fact, like there's this story that goes around in April of 2010, Japan's largest Yakuza group supposedly bought a block of 50 front row seats at a tournament so they could be prominently visible during the televised bouts. And it was done to cheer up all of their buddies who were in jail watching from prison, because in prison, they always watch sumo live. So they were like...
It's like a meetup.
Yes, exactly. And why was all this happening? Well, it was happening because if you owe $50,000 in gambling debt to these guys, then surely you're going to be like, can we just trade for can I just give you 50 block seats, the best seats in the house, and have you take those and knock a bit off my gambling debt? Like that was all a part of this situation. It's all tied together. Yes.
That makes sense.
It all ties together, and it was a big problem, and fans were upset. So upset that the NHK actually canceled its live coverage of the 2010 Summer Sumo Tournament. And there was
Is that because those guys?
It's because of all of these scandals kind of working one upon each other, just sort of led to this moment where the fans were so upset. And well, to the point where the sponsors were pulling out. The sponsors were like, we don't want to have anything to do with y'all. Like, there's Yakuza crime bosses showing up on the front row. All these guys are betting, and there's all these other scandals happening, which I'll talk about in the next few weeks. But we're ashamed. We don't want our company associated with this stuff. So they were losing their big money donors. All of their money was going down the tank. And so NHK was like, we're not covering this live. And the JSA said, we're not giving an Emperor's Cup to this summer sumo tournament. We're just not doing it because this is completely unacceptable. And it was the first time I think NHK had dropped the live broadcast since it started in 1953. The fans weren't showing up. There were just so many high-ranked wrestlers that were implicated in all of this that it made everybody really uncomfortable.
Wow.
Yeah.
So all in all,
the JSA got a new chairman who promised to clean up the sport.
Of course.
Draft plans were drawn up to sever ties with the Yakuza, but I'm really unsure about what was officially decided upon. It's incredibly hard to find online. Actually, I'm still looking. Like, what are the rules that they put in place to make sure that this doesn't happen. I saw what was advised.
I imagine there are the rules like every other rule where it's like a Band-Aid, but it's not a real fixing of it.
We don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But what's great is media started to really come out and said that it was time for the JSA to change. And it seemed like, I kept seeing all of this verbiage like, the JSA has to get out from behind the walls of secrecy. It has to stop being a good old boys club, right? It has to become an independent, professional, nonpartisan sport with a rule book, and like there have to be defined penalties for very specific behavior. Like it can't be vague anymore. It can't be this like all about this vague idea of hinkaku and heart. Like you have to tell people what's expected of them, and you have to have rules and punishments in order. Now I don't know what has happened, if anything has come of it, but at least people are saying that.
Because this was just the first of many scandals.
Well, it was kind of towards the end. The other scandals were happening concurrently or even beforehand. This is not in chronological order.
Got it.
But it helped me understand why. Do you remember in 2022 when Hidenoumi, Tobizaru's brother, was fined and he was taken out of sumo for a tournament because of a betting problem. Do you remember that?
Oh, I think I vaguely remember something like that.
Yeah, it was about a year ago, and he was immediately given a suspension because of betting on baseball. And I kind of remember at the time thinking, that's kind of harsh. Like, wow, you're going to dock some of his pay and tell him that he can't wrestle just because of betting on baseball. But after looking at all of this and seeing how betting on baseball is very connected with organized crime and how the JSA was basically drenched in all these Yakuza connections, I can see now why the JSA was like, we have to stop this immediately. Like these boys, these coaches
what's interesting
have to adhere to these ethical standards.
Yeah, but how does little old Hidenoumi just all of a sudden decide to bet on baseball? He's got there's tentacles in the JSA, tentacles, all these supporters, all these parties, all these opportunities to hobnob with people. And he has to know what happened in the past. So I still think, it's pretty interesting. You'd have one wrestler get caught and punished, but if we think that that's an isolated incident, that would be kind of crazy. I think that there's constantly probably got to be a pressure or the possibility that these guys are being lured back in.
And I hope that at the same time, there's constantly people watching over them, making sure that that doesn't happen again, because they know that their business is going to tank if this happens again, right? So there's got to be some sort of advisory panel, or there has to be a group of guys who are thinking about ethical behaviors and standards and are trying to keep 700 people in line, which is almost an impossible task. But at least thinking about that.
That is interesting.
Yeah. Do you want to know what happened to the Ozeki that kicked all this off?
I hope he found a Yakuza therapist so he could work through this. I mean, if there's a Yakuza real estate agent broker, there's a Yakuza therapist.
Well, like I said before, he appealed the decision to get booted from sumo. In the meantime, he accepted that his sumo life was probably over, but he said that he did want to stay in the JSA and become a coach because he was very good at sumo.
I was going to say, I mean, that's a possibility of like a higher up, like Oyakata.
Yes.
That they negated the possibility.
Yeah. Well, he lost his final appeal in 2015. As he lost his final appeal, he did open his own restaurant.
I was going to say the next best option is a Chanko Nabe.
He says he battled depression for a good long while, but once he lost that final appeal, he had an unofficial haircutting ceremony in a hotel, and it was widely attended. He had 350 guests, including Koto Shogiku.
Wow.
I know. It wasn't the last of his troubles. He did get some fines, or he was charged for hiring non-Japanese workers who didn't have the proper visas at his restaurant. But he did find a lovely woman to marry, and they have a daughter, and he is now 47 years old. I have this idea that these guys are so much older, and this happened ages ago, but it's current history. It's what's happening right now. So this guy is out there in his restaurant now trying to make things work with this history. And he's very famous. You can look him up online. He had a great sumo run until that betting incident.
Well, he also has a tendency to make some real bad decisions. So
yeah, true enough.
Some people just can't make good, solid, smart decisions, and there's repercussions for being a dum-dum.
It's hard to,
but oh well.
It's hard to know how to wrap up an episode on sumo scandals, but
let's just call it Scandals.
Scandal Part 1. Because we'll have more coming next week.
That'll be Scandals Part 2.
I don't know. I just think I think it's useful to understand what we're watching and why there's such an emphasis on ethical behavior and why there's still such an environment of secrecy.
Well,
that hangs
and I
on.
think
it's an interesting combo.
It might explain too, sumo's popular. We love the sport, but we tend to overlook kind of the brutality of it and the terrible things about it. And it does deserve to be talked about. I love the sport when it's about culture and history and everything, that's awesome about it, and the bouts and the wrestlers. But there's a real deep kind of seedy past of sumo, and I imagine you find that within a lot of sports. But you got to talk about it all, warts and all, the sport, if you really want to know more about the sport and the history of it.
So there we go. The seedy history of sumo, Part 1.
Scandals. So I guess until next week, I am Leslie.
And I'm Laurie, and I'll see y'all next week.
Okay, bye.
Bye.